Good afternoon, Erica. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for being willing to share your story with the world. So I'd like to start off, if you can talk a little bit about your diagnosis.
Absolutely. And just what an honor it is to be here with you today. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I was diagnosed with a rare form of high-grade aggressive endometrial cancer in 2021. Never having anyone in my family have cancer except for an aunt of mine who died of lung cancer, but she was a very, very heavy smoker for years and years. So, of course, when I got that diagnosis, I was initially shocked and just overwhelmed. Uh, and Getting the diagnosis itself was a very interesting procedure. The doctor who actually did I got a D&C because I couldn't tolerate the biopsy, didn't even hand me the diagnosis. She had her nurse hand it to me, and that was my initial, like, where's the doctor? How do you give someone a cancer diagnosis and the doctor doesn't even deliver it? So that was my first step into the arena of dealing with a cancer doctor. Um, so it was called high-grade serous carcinoma. And of course, I immediately started to Google the crap out of it because I wanted to know what I was looking at.
The nurse didn't tell you not to Google it.
No, I don't believe she mentioned that at all to me. She didn't say that. No.
Even if she did, you'd probably Google it anyways.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My initial response was I was not going to tell anyone in my family for two reasons. Number one, of course, I didn't know how to tell them that. I became completely overwhelmed to have to think about telling that to my daughter who's 30 or my son who's 24. I didn't know how to say that to them. So I didn't for a while. I kept my diagnosis very private. I also know my family. I have some brothers and sisters who are also Google experts. And the minute they knew what I had, they would Google it and they would become very terrified because the prognosis for high-grade serous carcinoma stage 3 is not good. It's not even 5 years. So I was very, very overwhelmed with that. And then I was faced with the full hysterectomy, the robotic hysterectomy, which yanked all of my female reproductive, just basically cleaned out my whole pelvic region, and brachytherapy I had at the time. So 3 rounds of internal brachytherapy, which, by the way, destroyed my female parts. And they never told me that it would either. It totally created scar tissue so that it's totally closed up right now. And that's another whole thing. But that was my
And you
diagnosis.
said radiation therapy.
Yes, yeah. Brachytherapy, they call it. Yep.
Okay.
So that was the diagnosis, was stage 3 high-grade serous carcinoma. Mixed cell, they called it, which I still don't know what that means, actually.
And so you did that treatment, and then where were you? Sorry, go ahead.
did. My initial response when it came time to talk about frontline standard of care chemo, which I was quite adamant against not doing. Because for several reasons. Number one, I felt great at the time of my diagnosis. I didn't feel sick. So, and I had tons of energy. I was 58 years old. I live a really, really high energy life. I'm from New York. I live in Woodstock, New York, and I live in a very organic green community. And so I'm here living my best life, and they want to throw me into chemo. The other reason I didn't want to do chemotherapy was I was married to a man from Africa, from Ivory Coast, who I brought to New York, who I met in Africa. I lived in Africa for 10 years. So I've had kind of an interesting life. Part of my African story, I think, is part of my emotional terrain, but that's a separate conversation. That was quite traumatizing on many, many levels. But anyway, my husband came to New York and was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Okay.
He did 6 months of chemotherapy and he ended up dying of chemotherapy complications. So when they started to throw chemo my way, I was like, no, I'm not. I'll figure something else out. But I'm not running to chemo that quickly. And my children and my family panicked. They were like, Mom, are you crazy? Like, you got to do chemo. You don't mess around with that stuff. And honestly, my family and my children kind of scared me into it, but my initial reaction was no, I didn't want to do it.
Hmm.
They, I ended up listening to them, and just
Yeah.
out of my ear, I think, and the unknown, I just thought that I would try it and
Yeah.
hope the best.
Yeah.
So I could tell by about I would say the fourth. It was a 6 round regime, 6 rounds every 3 weeks.
Okay.
Go into the chemo infusion center and get the drip, so to speak. Sit there for 5 hours and have that stuff dropped into me. And by the fourth round, I could tell that it was not working because I ran my CA-125 cancer marker test.
Hmm.
And during the initial part of the chemo, it started to go down. But by the fourth round, it started to slowly rise back up.
It's creeping back up.
Yes, it was. And I asked my doctor, my oncologist, why is my CA-125 going up? That inclines me to think that this chemo is not working. And he, being the standard of care oncologist, said, "Oh, I understand why you would say that, Erika, but we really just need to finish the chemo and see where we're at then." And so I did. I banged through it and I plowed through it, and it was rough. It was really, really rough for a lot of reasons. The main reason it was rough because when I started my chemo, like I said, I felt great. I was almost in the prime of my life, but I could see and feel how debilitating that chemo was. At least I'd get it, hypothetically on a Thursday or whatever. And by Saturday morning, I couldn't even get out of bed for 3 days. I lived in a huge old Victorian house, and my bedroom was up on the second floor. I couldn't even go down into the kitchen, and I lived alone. And so there
Wow.
were days
Yeah.
when I didn't know what to do.
Just
I just,
bedridden. And you've
yeah,
got the PTSD and the emotional stress of seeing your husband go through that, which,
yeah,
aids in that.
yeah.
Question for you, while you were doing that, did they measure other markers like your white blood cell counts or your hemoglobin to see how you were handling it from an immune perspective?
They did, although they never went over my labs with me. I never really fully understood my labs, and that's one of the things I remember Dr. Winters talking about, was that you must understand your labs, and they're very telling. And so my I now understand them a lot better. But yes, they did run them, but they never explained them to
They
me.
didn't explain them.
And they
Okay.
did give me a grid table where I could compare a normal range to an abnormal range. I never had that until recently. I started to ask for that, and I have gotten it.
Now you've gotten that. And did you do anything complementary to support the chemo, like fasting, or at that point, was there anything from a diet perspective in play?
No, I didn't start my dietary changes until after I finished the chemo.
Okay.
When I knew that the chemo wasn't working and I needed to start to really take some control of my path for myself, that's when I started to change and look at my diet.
And so that's a good point. So after you were done with the chemo, then did you follow up with the radiation after that, or were you doing them at the same time? How was that working?
I did. I finished the 6 rounds of chemo, and then I did 3 rounds following the chemo of internal radiation therapy for 3 consecutive weeks, once a week for 3 weeks.
Gotcha. And then where were you at after that? Where were your markers? Where was your cancer burden?
So my cancer, I was told, was from CT scans and PET scans, contained mostly in the pelvic region, in a couple of lymph nodes that lit up on the PET scans. And my cancer marker at that point, my cancer marker was still never down below into the normal range. I think when I finished my chemo, my CA-125 was somewhere in the 70s, 30 or below being normal.
Hmm.
So that's where I was when I finished the chemo, somewhere in the 70s or 80s.
Yeah. And so what was the recommendation after that?
So the recommendation was that because the lymph nodes that lit up were very small, they were not much farther enlarged than a normal lymph node, and there was only 4 of them at the time. Uh, the suggestion was to come back in 3 months for another scan. That's what my oncologist said. He said, I would not recommend that you go back into treatment right now. The only thing we saw was these 4 lymph nodes that lit up, but they didn't light up strong, and their growth compared to a normal sized lymph node was very, very small. So I
And what
waited
did you do in that 3 months?
I'm sorry?
And what did he suggest that you did in that 3 months?
Nothing, just go and live my life. He didn't suggest I do anything. He didn't suggest I change my diet. He didn't suggest I changed anything. He just said, I don't think that you need to go back into treatment right now. I'll schedule you for another scan in 3 months.
And was that just based off of the ability to be able to tolerate it and labs? I'm sure maybe labs might have been indicating something to him that you needed some time to kind of recover from the treatment.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah. So what did you do?
So at that point, when that happened, I have a brother of mine who is a complete health freak and nut freak. And he was the one that said to me, sis, I really think that you should start a ketogenic diet. And I've heard of keto a little bit, but I certainly never tried keto. I've always been a semi-organic, semi-healthy eater, but not 100% all the time. I would mostly cook my own food the majority of the time, but occasionally would have Chinese takeout or pizza from the local pizzeria or whatever. But when my brother said, start eating keto, I didn't really even have a long conversation with him. That's when I took a self journey into exploring the ketogenic diet, and getting your body into therapeutic ketosis. I then stumbled upon, I don't know how, it's almost like the universe started to throw these leaders in this field kind of in my path. I didn't really go looking for them per se. I think that they came into my YouTube feeds and into my Facebook feeds via my Google searches as I would search up things to at some point when I got that initial positive PET scan and the doctor told me that he thought that the cancer was still hanging out in my pelvic. That's when I knew that are you going to just listen to your oncologist, Erika? Or are you going to step out and educate yourself and take responsibility for yourself and your life? I saw what cancer and treatment did to my wonderful, beautiful, amazing husband, John. He was 39 years old in the process, and then just gone in the grave. And the system, yeah, and it documented on his death certificate that bleomycin was the cause of death, bleomycin toxicity. Bleomycin was one of his chemo drugs in his 4 chemo cocktail for Hodgkin's. So that was cause of death for him. So that, really made me look at my diet. And then I started to get video feeds into my YouTube and other places. The first one that popped up was actually Dr. Thomas Seyfried.
Yeah.
And I watched almost everything I could find on Dr. Seyfried, all of his interviews, podcasts, as much as I could. Really tried to listen to him because he seemed very valid to me and very brilliant, being a cellular biologist. I was like, he's one that really understands and has done the studies. I read his papers. So I really started to investigate him. After him, I found Dr. Winters. Naisha Winters came into my feed, and I really looked at her and I read her book, and started to really step into the ketogenic diet. So upon educating myself and listening to what other people other than standard of care doctors had to say, I started my own journey and I stepped fully into keto. I did keto hard for about 7 months, and I combined ketogenic diet with long-term water fasting, which I did on my own, by the way, and I lived by myself. And my friends and family were petrified because they said, you can't do that. It's too dangerous. What if you pass out? What if something worse happens? And I said, I know my limit. And the truth of the matter is that when I felt great on keto, but I really felt in my best when I was doing the water fasting. Once I tackled the first 2 or 3 days of that hunger and learned how to tailor it and ride with it and deal with it, by the third day, I was flying high. So it was great. And I had
Yeah.
tons of it. And interestingly, my cancer marker 125 slowly started to go down. But
Yeah.
then honestly, after about 7 months of hard keto, I kind of crashed and burned and I started to bring in some carbs. So I've been, I would say, I feel like I've been an experiment unto myself only because I didn't really have a practitioner to help me. I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't have anybody to talk to. I researched what I could and I listened to what I could. I read what I could. But then I decided to be brave on my own. And I always think about, how do I feel today? Like, how do I feel? Do I feel sick today? Do I feel like cancer is going to take me out? Not, it's definitely not taking me out today.
Yeah.
I have not reached the 5 year marker yet either, though. So I'm still quite a ways out from that 5 year. Uh,
And have you had any PET scans?
I have. I've continued my PET scans faithfully. Since that time, the lymph nodes, interestingly, have never resolved, but they've never increased in the subsequent PET scans that I've ran every 3 months faithfully. The lymph nodes, that's still the same. Initially, it was 5, I believe. Now it's down to 3 that are indicated on my PET scan. They talk about
Mhm.
3. And when they talk about being, 2.1 centimeters long and 1.3 centimeters wide, when I look at those numbers over the scans history, they haven't changed very much. None of them have grown over a centimeter. I do have 2 new growths that have shown up on my scans. One in one part of an abdominal wall, and another one on what they call the cervical cuff, which is where they close your female parts down once they take out all the. They say that it's common to have a recurrence there, and I can imagine why, because it's a cervical cuff.
Yeah.
Probably cells grow weird and funky down in there.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
claim that. They've never done a biopsy. My original oncologist asked to do a biopsy, and I allowed him to do it. He missed the lymph node that he was going for, came back with no lymph node tissue at all, and then 3 months later asked if he could go get the abdominal growth sample. And I said, well, why didn't you go for that one in the first place? And he said, well, you didn't have it back then. And I said, oh, yes, I did, because I know my scans. And they mentioned it. I said, go back and look at that August PET scan. It mentions a growth in my abdominal wall on the left-hand side. And he's like, really? Let me go look. And there it was. And then he said, can I do it again? I said, nope. And that's when I sacked him and I went and found, I have another oncologist now, from Roswell Park who I kind of like, but I figure my oncologist is one piece to my story, but only one piece. And
Yeah.
so
I was going to
that's
say, do
kind of
you
where
know who else is on your team? Have you built your team yet?
I have not built my team because I don't know where to build my team. The other professional that I listen to a lot is Dr. Walter Longo, and
Hmm.
he talks about building your team, which he recommends an oncologist, a nutritionalist, a biologist, a cellular biologist, which I love, and then I think a therapist or something like that. And I really appreciated that. So basically, my team consists of my dear friend who's a nutritionalist, who hasn't really honestly helped me all that much, although she's a wonderful friend, um, and my oncologist. And that's my team. And therapist. You have a therapist that I work with.
Yeah, that is always good. That mental emotional component, and especially what you went through in Africa, I can only imagine. And then with your husband, it takes a huge emotional toll, as well as the stress, and our cells respond to that. Um,
Yes.
so, that's challenging. I would like to recommend that you look at one of the practitioners that is trained with Dr. Nisha and her methodology, because a couple of things just to kind of point out here is one, the CA markers are great and they are important, but we have some better markers. And
Mhm.
they're really simple lab markers. And the way that Nisha looks at it is we can all have cancer floating around at any time and in any area and, doing its thing. And it can be living here. And like you said with your husband, he didn't die from the cancer, he died from the treatment, right? So we can live, if we look at cancer as more of a manageable disease, just like diabetes or anything else, right? Where it can live, but it's not going to kill us. Then that would mean that, yes, we have cancer, but our bodies are in control of the cancering process. So you're pushing it back, holding it back, and you're living your life, right? You're doing all of the things. And so there are markers out there that allow us to identify if you are in control of your health or if the cancer is in control. And that's what we educate the clinicians on that come through here is what are those markers and how do you identify actually what is going on with somebody and when they are vulnerable and when they're not vulnerable, when they need immune therapies, when they need oxidative therapies, when they don't need oxidative therapies, because cancer will find a way to manifest if it needs to manifest, if the environment is still having issues. And cancer is adaptable. And so you have to adapt the methods and the therapies that you're doing as the cancer is adapting. But it's a very manageable disease given working with the right practitioners who really know how to identify this. And what I will say, like with oncologists, what oncologists are trained in is they understand the tumors, right? And the tumor behavior and the tumor genetics. And the doctors that are trained through the metabolic approach to cancer course through our program are trained in the person and all of the things that are surrounding the tumor that are making the tumors grow or making the cancerous cells grow. So it might be very, very beneficial to get into one of those practitioners. And then we also have advocates in our community, and the advocates are, can be your nutritionists. A lot of them are nutritionists, certified dietitians. We have nurses that are advocates. And we have people that focus on mental emotional issues, people that just focus on microbiome and kind of all of those different things. So lots of different specialties in that area, depending on kind of what is more needed. But things like your lymph node, there's things that can be done for like lymphatic drainage. So
I
that,
got out on my rebounder on my back deck every single day.
yeah.
Someone told me, I forget who, to get a rebounder, and I got one, and I'm on it at least twice a day for 5 to 10 minutes a day. And my lymph nodes, interestingly, being told initially that the cancer's at a slow burn in those lymph nodes, they've never really expanded. Now these other growths have, and I probably will get a biopsy at some point here just to see. But I do rebound on my rebounder, and I think that I can just feel those lymph nodes in that pelvic region just really shaking down and shaking out. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
one.
and that's I love that, like envisioning that happening too, like shake out, and then also taking some good binders when you do that.
Mm.
Binders are like charcoal binders. There's a really good one from a company called Cellcore.
Mhm.
And essentially what it's doing is as those toxins are there floating and they're ruminating in our body, they're like magnets and they just grab it. And then
Pull
when
it
you
out.
go to the restroom, yeah, it just helps to pull all of those toxins out. It really does a good job at supporting the process.
Wow.
And, when you're cancering, you don't want to take a whole bunch of binders at once. So it needs to be done, in a very kind of the tortoise wins the race kind of way. So if you're doing, if you're doing the rebounder 2 or 3 times a week, then just take it when you're on the rebounder. You don't want to take them with any other foods or supplements because it'll just basically, it just makes them, it doesn't make them absorbable because it's binding to everything. Right. So if you were to take it with medicine and just bind them and throw them out, it would be a waste of money.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Lots of fun stuff that can be employed and tools that can be used and then just, going back to that knowledge, it sounds like you were really one listening to your gut, and your gut was driving you to say, hey, look, you have the opportunity to make a difference. You have the opportunity to do something that's going to help
Mhm.
manage this disease process.
Yes, absolutely. And then since that time, I've had several friends who I've known for many, many, many years, who in the last 4 years got cancer diagnoses. And I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like it's true just in having conversations with our friends, which is that both of these individuals now have passed beyond the veil. They didn't make it. Their cancer took them out. And I don't believe either one of them tried any type of alternate approach. So when I saw that happen to them and
Mm.
my husband, I got a thought. It was almost like an epiphany one day that, cancer is very aggressive. So you have to hit it in aggressive ways in your life. And I almost said to myself, Erika, you must be brave and be willing to try other things, because if you only listen to your standard of care oncologist, I'm sorry, but you're probably not going to make it. And so I've just seen other people that only listen to their oncologist, they didn't make it. So, and they didn't change their diet. They didn't try these other things. So I eat keto, and now I don't eat keto as hard as I did the first 7 months. Uh, I would really like to be able to do some 72 to 90 hour water fast once a month, but I seem to only be able to get to it about once every 3 months. Honestly,
Yeah,
it's hard.
that's
It's hard.
good. Yeah. Yeah, and I
Yep.
know, for some people they do 5 days every 3 months, right? So then you just do that full 5 days, 3 months, and then maybe, or the other option is, I mean, there's lots of different ways you can do it, where one day a week you go 24 hours, right? But really, when you have cancer, getting in past that 72 hours is really good, because you start getting into autophagy
Exactly.
and cell death. So that's really good. The other thing is, when we look at the options that are available to us through standard of care, the thing to keep in mind is that we've learned a lot about cancer over just even the last 20 years. And there are so many different therapies that are out there. I mean, just the two that we talked about, well, one, keto, two, water fasting, three, rebounders and detox methods, protocols. Now we've got mistletoe, which has been approved we've been doing studies on that at Mayo, and that's becoming more standard. But these are all things we've learned in like the last 20 years. And guess what it takes, guess the time it takes for translational medicine, from the time that we understand a therapeutic benefit of something to the time that it becomes more mainstream. Any idea what the typical time frame is?
I would say years, I would think.
At a minimum, 17 years. So we are learning faster as a community, as clinicians, with technology. We are learning faster than it can be rolled out, right? And so, we're talking 20 years from now, keto and some of these other things might not be approved for another 20 years. Well,
Yeah.
your life is on the line, 20 years is not okay,
And
right?
I often
Yeah.
wonder if the standard of people who are running the standard of care, the National Cancer Institute, and the other big pharma, as they call them, are they really interested in alternate therapies? Because they're not going to be making the buck anymore. They make gazillions off feeding people chemo,
Yeah.
and and then they don't make it, and then that's another whole story. But I often wonder, because my first oncologist, I told him, and he never discouraged me from keto or water fasting or
That's
the
good.
supplements. I gave him the list of supplements that I was taking. I do green tea daily. I do 3 months a pop of soursop tea. I lived in Jamaica for a while and just harvested my own soursop and brought it back and started guzzling down that tea twice or three times a day, just always having it in my bloodstream. And he knew And he never said, don't do that, Erica, but he never asked me any questions about it. I think at one point he might have said, wow, I think what you're doing might be working. He did say that once, but he also, within the same 6-month window, told me that I'd probably be dead within 5 years. And
Mm,
that's when I really walked away from him after he made some other medical errors. But for him to tell me that, I didn't want my oncologist to say that to me, because even if he believes it, um, anyway, that's a whole
yeah,
mind trip to that they play on you. And I don't think it's intentional. I just think it's how they're trained. They're not trained
yeah,
to think the way that we are. And many times I asked him for a nutritionist. I said, I need to work with a dietitian nutritionist. I have to, it's one thing to eat keto, but it's another thing to get yourself in therapeutic ketosis, which I never could do. I hammered away on no carbs, moderate protein, high fats, veggies. But I'll tell you what, that keto mojo told me I was never in ketosis. And it was frustrating because I was depriving myself. And I think it did keep the disease at bay, but I never got into ketosis. I mean,
yeah.
very rarely. I would when I water fasted, but it took me the full 3 or 4 days of water fasting before I finally hit ketosis, according to my keto mojo. So,
Yeah. Well, we could run some genes, some genetic tests to see why that is. And then see what support you need in order to make that happen if you wanted to get in there. Yeah, there's definitely ways. We see it all the time. There's a lot of different factors that can come into play that just make it harder for some people, and they need different types of support, help support in breaking down fats. Not everybody breaks down fats very well, so you've got to break down fats. And then I will say, one of the most common problem that us women have is our fear of fat. And, actually putting enough fat on, because we've always been told fat will make you fat. And so it's much harder to get women into ketosis than it is to get men into ketosis because of that. Yeah.
interesting.
So,
Very,
a really good example is, and if you were making yourself a thing of scrambled eggs in the morning, you could actually put some extra olive oil or avocado oil or fat in it, and then, some salt and pepper, get some good flavor. Men are like, yeah, no problem. Load up. I'll throw a cup of olive oil on it. Women are like, no way, I'm not putting more fat on it. Right. And sometimes we just really need to get those macronutrients up. But then also can be genetic issues that can just make it harder for women, or not just for women, for anybody in general, based off of their genetic makeup. Yeah. So there are definitely ways to support that if you wanted to figure out how to do it. But yeah, and I will say the other thing with standard of care oncologists, if we're talking about it takes 17, it's probably closer to 17 to 30 years. I think 17 years is the minimum, 30 years is the, um, you know, can take up to 30 years. Sometimes it might not even get there. And we're talking from clinical trials to, testing at the bedside to getting approved by insurance, that whole time frame, it takes that long. So they're
yes,
not going to teach clinicians about it until it gets to that stage. Right. And even Walter Longo, who's at UCLA,
yes.
he's an oncologist at UCLA. I
Mhm.
have plenty of patients that oncologists are at UCLA and don't know anything about the teachings of Walter Longo, so even though he's in the standard of care model, his methods are still not heavily adopted, because, like you said, one, who's going to put it to market? And then two, yeah, they're just not educating the clinicians about it. So when we go to our standard of care oncologist and we say, hey, I'm thinking about this, they don't really have a lot to say, because one, they can't recommend it because it's not approved by insurance. And two, how they don't know, right? They just don't know.
They don't know. It's clear that they don't know, because I kind of looked to my oncologist, and I'm looking to my new oncologist for some answers, and just some conversation. And I can tell, I'm like, is she holding out on me, or does she really not know? Because there were lots of avenues of conversation that I wanted to have with her, that it's almost like I didn't even know how to get there with her because we were so far away from it. And she wasn't going down, she wasn't slowing down long enough to have those conversations because she needed to get through what she needed to get through. So,
Yeah. 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 Well, and that's another thing that they contend with is just time, time in their appointments, time that they can spend with you, time that they can go over these things. It's really tough. They're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard spot in terms of what all they can support and recommend.
yes, absolutely. And my second oncologist I started working for, I was very hopeful for her because the first session that I had with her, she spent a lot of time talking to me. She was a Pakistani doctor, and she asked me, somehow she read in my charts or something that I had lived in Africa for a long time. And she spent a long time talking to me about my life in Africa, what it was like to be married to an African, what that felt like, what was it like to bury him in an African
Wow.
funeral. And so I was very hopeful for her because she spent a lot of time that first session talking to me about those things. And then she did a very interesting physical exam that my first oncologist never did. And she kind of checked like my overall vitality, my vital energy, just in terms of my body.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that I rated very high. I had a lot of really good, strong, vital energy, just based on some pressure points and some proddings and pokings that she did. And then the second time I went to see her 4 months later, uh, she didn't support me the way that she had initially. She didn't ask me those probing questions. She didn't ask me much at all about how I was feeling. She did a very routine. She looked a lot like my first oncologist second time around. So that was very telling
That
for
sounds
me.
like she's kind of on that path where she wants to be. I mean, I think most doctors are healers. They want to go there and then they get caught up in the system and time and all of that stuff and just the limitations of what they can actually explore.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
But she did tell me that if I asked her once, I said, I am someone who's very committed to an alternate diet. I do ketogenic and I do long-term water fasting. And would you be willing to be part of that team if I could put that team together? And she did say yes.
Nice.
Yes, she did say
That's
that.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's
she
amazing.
wasn't opposed to it. She's quite young and she wasn't opposed to it at all. So,
Amazing. Well, after this, I'll send you a recommendation of a couple of doctors and some nutritionists as well. You've actually got two doctors in your backyard. I say in your backyard because I don't know where everything is in relation to New York. There's Dr. Kaplan. He is in Buffalo. And then Dr. Miriam Rahab. She's in New York City somewhere. I don't know her exact location, but both, yeah, she's in New York City. So both incredibly talented doctors who can be supportive and complementary to your standard of care oncologists.
wow,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Yes, because it's very hard and it's almost like just being like I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. I work with kids, I work with students, I teach special ed. I have in some ways, aside from the fact that I lived abroad for many, many years, in some ways I have quite a now more than ever a very simple life. And so to navigate my journey of like you said, learning to live with cancer, but not and learning to manage it and not let it take me out. Um, First of all, it plays a mind trip on me daily still. It's just
Mm.
always there. There's no getting rid of it. So I'm constantly processing it, trying to take in new information, but also not obsessing on that information to the point where I can't live my life. It's all about living my life, living my best life, right? That's what it's about. I don't want to destroy the joy and peace and happiness that I can have in my life as I wig myself out on trying to save myself from
Yeah,
cancer. I think that's one of the beautiful things that I've recognized in terms of my cancer diagnosis, that it came about 2.5 years ago. And because I've had this time for 2.5 years and thinking about it every day, as I am a thinking type of person, um, thinking, that maybe my cancer will kill me. cancer kills people, right? It might end up killing you, Erica, but the fact that, it's not taking me out immediately, and I'm not going down overnight. I might go in a car crash tomorrow, who knows, right? So the
Yeah.
fact that I can teach and educate myself and explore the journey that I'm on is really exciting. Aside from the fact that it's overwhelming, of course.
Yeah. Empowering,
It's
empowering and
empowering.
overwhelming.
Yes,
Do
it is empowering.
you,
Feel like there
you,
is something that I can do because I've seen it. I've seen it in my numbers and in my labs. Like I said, I'm a little wobbly right now. I'm not hitting the keto hard, but here's what I do. Instead of hitting keto hard, like I said, I myself put myself on this medical scientific experimentation, is I do time restricted calorie restriction eating. So basically, most days I eat one plate of food. And it's a mostly keto plate, but it might have, like today I had 2 pieces of whole grain organic toast. I had it, and I let myself have it, but I haven't had toast in the last time I had, like, to talk about toast like it's a big deal, right? But you know, I did have toast 3 weeks ago. I had a slice at my mother's house, and I have had 2 ice creams, honestly, in the last month. I've had 2 ice creams, and I just allow myself to have that because I know I've seen, and I really trust in myself that when it comes time for me to double down and hammer down hard with the water fasting and the keto, I'll do it because I've done it before. So I give myself this little back off of a break. I don't tend to keep the pedal to the metal, so to speak, on keto because it's hard to do for me. I don't know how other people honestly stay 100% keto and ketosis for years on end. I really want to know who that person is because it's I haven't been able to do it, and I got a nasty cancer diagnosis. So,
yeah. Well,
but I
we've got a lot of people in the community who do, but with that
not
said, they're all in the community and everybody's talking and sharing strategies and tips. And then you just have some, you have the extreme. Allison Gannett is a really good example of somebody who I think is just always in ketosis. She was diagnosed with terminal cancer 10 years ago. So she's 10 years past her expiration date. And she's very religious about it because she's got, brain tumors that, continue to adapt and manifest and all of that stuff. But there are definitely examples of it. She's also produced cookbooks and she has a ton of fun with it and she teaches courses on it and stuff like that. So, there are lots of really good tools and resources out there. But at the same time, we have to be kind to ourselves and we
yes,
have to want to live because we enjoy living, right? And so there's that balance, there's that balance. If we look at it and say, all right, I know, I really want this right now, and we're constantly in that depriving ourselves of it, then that will actually backfire, right? We could end up with an eating disorder. We can end up with something. So, it's kind of that balance of like weaving into that lifestyle and understanding how to then consume those things without really consuming them. So, me, myself, and I have been in ketosis in and out for about 10 years. For the first 5 years, I still was like having the occasional gluten. I say gluten because gluten kind of being like representing all of those things, a donut or bread or pizza or whatever. And then I started saying, all right, I'm going to pull out the gluten. And I would only do it occasionally. I would be like 80% in ketosis and then 20% not. But the 20% was pretty extreme. I'm like, give me everything. Give me
there
beer.
you go. Hey,
Give it all, right?
yes.
And then I started to get really bad arthritis. And so I noticed that when I would be in my 20%, I couldn't really use my hands very well and my wrists would lock all the time. And I was like, oh, and then my husband says, it's definitely gluten. And I said, you just say that because you're a celiac. You think gluten's a problem for everybody. And he said, 90 days, don't do it for 90 days and let's see what happens. So I didn't have anything for 90 days. And then after that 90 days, I had some shortbread cookies.
There you go.
And that next day, I could not move my wrists. And so I was then able to say, okay, I got to completely cut out gluten. I cut out gluten. Now, fast forward to 5 years, I
Mhm.
make at home a lot of those things that taste like, bread and all of these things and just don't
Yeah.
even taste it anymore. What I actually notice is that it tastes way better. Like keto cookies to me taste way better than regular cookies.
Sure. I know there's a lot of amazing keto recipes out there now more than ever. Really,
Yeah,
with the almond flour and the alternate flours, the stevia and the monk fruit sweeteners, they're great. They really hit the spot. And you can have as much whipped cream as you want, right? So I'm
right. Yeah.
all about the
Yeah.
whipped cream.
Yeah. Yeah. All of those things. Yeah. Can just be so much better. Like, I even think silly things like spaghetti using spaghetti squash,
That's
using spaghetti
nice.
squash as my like base as my noodle because you can put all of the olive oil and salt and pepper and lemon and it's so good. And then you put your spaghetti on top of that. Like, oh, it's just so I'm like, this is way better than regular spaghetti.
Yes. So
At least
satisfying.
the spaghetti that we get here. But yeah, I mean, it takes time and it grows into it, and everything doesn't happen overnight. We don't want to meet, we always say in our community, like, you have to meet people where they are at. And if you try to shove everything down everybody's throat all at once, it becomes overwhelming, it's stressful, and its life changes. We didn't develop habits overnight. So we can't change habits overnight, right? And there's also a huge learning curve in like what it's doing. And if we don't understand how things are affecting us, then the
Mhm.
likelihood of us changing that is probably pretty slim.
True. That's very, very true. And it's hard to really know, it's hard to know the keto and the water fasting, I think are the most telling because we can see that in our markers, in our scans, we can see them diminishing and getting smaller. The other alternate things I try, like the soursop tea, the green tea, the rebounding on the trampoline, those things, it's hard to know if they're working because we don't have a controlled scientific uh researched is study right now, so it's very hard to
Yeah.
know really working. And the water fasting, I think in terms of thinking about numbers, I especially those long-term water fasts when you really go deep into autophagy and you ride there for you keep yourself and ride it there for a while. Don't a lot of the I feel like a lot of the research tells you to get into autophagy and then you can break your fast after 72 hours. No, that's where that sweet spot, you want to get there. It takes a while to get there and you got to stay there to really get those hours under my belt of where I'm really going to do the cell apoptosis and clean it up good. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
And
for
the back,
sure. That's like you get to that 72 hours and now all of a sudden like everything after that is gravy. It's like your bonus, right? Or like
right.
overtime. You're like, great, I'm an hour time overtime. I can now just start racking up the points, racking up the
Go to
money.
Yeah, I was thinking if I could hit usually my last meal is at night. So if I do 3 nights later and I'm at 72, if I could just skip that, have a nice glass of water, maybe throw some lemon in there and go to sleep, I'm not going to be hungry in the morning. So guaranteed I'm going to take at
Ride
least
that out.
24 hours if I
Yeah.
can push through that 72 hour, that's third night. Yep.
But that's a good tip. That's a good tool. My husband always says to tell yourself you don't get hungrier than hungry. So and then I always tell myself I'm going to eat, just not right now. Right. And
Yeah,
every time it pops in my head, because it pops in
that's
and
true.
then
I'm going to eat. I am, but just not right now. But
just
I am going to eat. Yes.
yeah.
It's amazing how powerful that statement is too, and it's incredibly comforting to know that we are going to be able to eat, just not now. And that coupled with knowing what we're doing to our bodies, that powerful cellular cleanup and cleaning out and flushing out is the two together. Woof, really
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Really powerful. Well, if you were somebody who was just freshly diagnosed listening to you right now, what would you tell that person?
Whew. I think I would tell them that. what I have learned is that your oncologist, as I said, is a key player, but they are only one piece to your puzzle, just one piece. And I feel like um, you can survive and learn to live with a cancer diagnosis. You don't have to be fearful of it, and that you know. The other thing I bought into, which we haven't brought up because I'm a little on the fence with it, and I'm not wholly invested, but I'll take whatever I can get at this point. Is the Chris Wark Square One, who I'm sure you know who Chris Wark is. Um, and he said many brilliant things too, and I kind of have my little takeaways of all my favorites. Now I also really like Chrissy Kesserling, who I think
She's
is
amazing.
somehow connected to your
Yeah,
institute.
yeah, she's
uh,
one of our practitioners. She would be a
yeah,
good practitioner as well for you, and she does remote.
wonderful. I really am feeling pulled towards Christy Kesserling. I really like what she has to say. um So that's what I would say to them, is that we can learn to live with it, but we must be brave enough to try the things that are available to us. Uh,
Yeah.
so much as, like Chris Wark said, if you're going to get cancer, now's the best time to get it because there's so much available to us.
Yes, yes, very true. There is so much available to us. It's just knowing how to leverage it and how to employ it, and also how to stay out or fight or flight, so that it doesn't get overwhelming and you don't have that constant fear. So I have some resources I'm going to share with you for that as well.
Perfect. Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope we talk again soon.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you so much. Take care.
You too. Bye bye.